This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence. This week, giving the homeless one-time grants of thousands of dollars.
Poverty is not a lack of character. It's just a lack of cash. And so how do you solve a lack of cash? Well, by giving people money.
And the surprise? It works. We'll find out why when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
If you earn $38,000 a year or more, you're actually in the top 10% globally of income. And we know from research that this is the group that causes about half of household climate pollution.
The role each American plays in slowing global warming. Then
they create these fictional trusts, they create tax loopholes, and in a sense they help them protect and preserve their money and create dynasties of wealth for future generations.
The business of growing wealth for the ultra-rich. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
On any given night in the United States, an estimated 580,000 people are homeless. Most of them have space in a shelter, but more than 200,000 of them spend the night somewhere else, maybe in their car or on the street. Over the course of a year, experts say 1.5 million people will be homeless for at least a little while. 30% of them are part of a homeless family.
Most people who become homeless really don't stay homeless that long, although the period of time they're homeless is becoming longer. When most people think about a person who's homeless, they tend to think of a single adult who's homeless on the street. That's not the whole story.
That's Nan Roman, president of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Roman says, despite what's sometimes claimed, for most people, homelessness isn't really just one or two missed paychecks away. But something similar, like a lost job or a medical crisis, can often start the dominoes falling.
Most people who are homeless really have become homeless because of some immediate crisis, and they need some resources to address that. A lot of people spend time in the homeless system essentially trying to save up enough money for deposits on housing, first and last month's rent. If they had the $3,000 or $4,000 it took to pay the deposits on an apartment, they wouldn't be living in the shelter. Once people become homeless and enter the homeless system, in a way, the longer they're there, the longer it takes to solve the problem for them, the worse off they are and the more resources they need to get out of it. There are some people who need additional services and assistance, and that can be a factor as well, not just money. But not everybody. For a lot of people, money solves the problem.
An innovative experimental program in Canada has tested out that theory and found that it's true. The answer to homelessness may simply be cash. The New Leaf Project selected 50 homeless people in Vancouver in 2018 and put $7,500 in each of their bank accounts to see what would happen.
There was no safeguard, so the cash transfer was unconditional, right? So they can spend it on whatever they want. We kept in touch with them every 3 months after the cash transfer to identify any possible changes in their lives. We tracked outcomes in 6 domains.
Dr. Jiang Zhao leads the study at the University of British Columbia, where she's Canada Research Chair and Associate Professor of Psychology and the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability. She says the results of putting cash in the pockets of the homeless were remarkable.
We found a 39% reduction on spending on temptation goods. That includes alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. This is directly opposite to what people think would happen. We also saw increases in stable housing. So cash recipients were able to move into stable housing after 1 month since the cash transfer. That was incredibly fast. The average wait time in Vancouver to get into stable housing for homeless is 6 to 9 months. So we basically shortened the amount of time you were homeless or in a shelter or on the street. The cash transfer increased your spending, rent, food. People became food secure as a result of this cash transfer. They spend more on clothing. They spend more on their children. So about 40% of our participants have dependents under 18 years old. Yeah, so for these individuals, they spend more money on food and clothing for their children.
The results are the direct opposite of what a lot of people believe, that the homeless are the undeserving poor, and if you give them a big wad of cash, they'll just blow it on drugs and alcohol.
I think that instinctively that is what people feel. And I think that people feel that a lot of people are homeless because they don't know how to use their resources or because they have mental illness or substance abuse disorders that have caused them to lose their housing. And that can certainly play a role. But really, the fundamental cause of homelessness is that people don't earn enough money to pay for the housing that's out there, and not the behavior of homeless people or their inability to use their resources properly. They get more out of their resources than probably the rest of us do. And studies like this really do show that when they're given the resources to address their basic needs, they will largely address their basic needs.
I think it's very much in line with everything we know about the wonders that cash can do for especially poor people. You know, my view is that poverty is not a lack of character. It's just a lack of cash. And so how do you solve a lack of cash? Well, by giving people money. It's the most efficient medicine that we have. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise that if you give people money, they'll be able to improve their lives.
That's Rutger Bregman, an internationally known Dutch historian and author of books including Humankind, A Hopeful History.
The real question is, why did we believe for so long that it wouldn't work, that they'll just waste the money on drugs or alcohol or something like that? It's actually a really old idea that goes back all the way to, I would say, the 15th or the 16th century. If you look at the poor laws in England at the time, the idea back then was already that there was something morally wrong with the poor, that they were poor because of some personal failing, that they were too lazy or something like that. But the reality is very, very different. We now have hundreds of studies from around the globe where researchers, governments, and NGOs have just given cash to poor people. And it turns out that it works really well. They use the money and spend it on education of their kids, for example, or just food or housing.
Still, the perception persists that homeless people have a moral defect that leads them to poor decisions and an inability to manage money. Bregman says it's true that the poor often make bad decisions, but the reason is often poverty itself. When you don't know where your next meal is coming from or whether you'll have a roof over your head that night, a person's brain has little room for anything else.
There's now really fascinating research, evidence from behavioral economics that shows that if we were poor, then actually all of us would be making poor decisions. And this is called the scarcity mindset. There's one study that shows that being poor has an impact on your IQ. You know, it lowers your IQ by around 14 points. So it's really not about the individual problem, it's about the context, it's about the circumstances. If you are poor, you always have to think about how you're going to make the end of the week. And obviously, that's going to have an impact on the kind of choices that you'll make. And that's perfectly understandable. The solution here is not to start preaching at poor people. No, the solution is to solve the problem and actually pull them out of poverty. So they have more bandwidth, sort of cognitive bandwidth, and they can make better decisions.
If you remove the uncertainty of having enough money, people literally get smarter. But Zhao says small monthly welfare checks aren't enough to take away that doubt. On the other hand, a $7,500 check is enough. That kind of money, as in the Vancouver experiment, allows the homeless to stop living literally hand to mouth. They can start thinking about the long term.
That is the more effective approach because it provides that capital, the startup capital. So now you can actually pay rent. You can pay deposit. You can buy furniture. You can even get a car, a used car. So these are kind of a startup capital you need to move out of homelessness, whereas the monthly paychecks do not let you do that.
But even if this is all true, thousands of dollars for every homeless person adds up to a lot. And Roman says we already pay a lot for homelessness.
The federal budget for homeless assistance, direct homeless assistance, is somewhere around $6 billion a year typically. But that also doesn't take into account, medical care and other kinds of things that people may need that come out of other budgets, food assistance and so forth, nor does it take into account state and local spending or the very sizable contribution to homeless assistance from corporations and philanthropy. So there's a lot of money that's being spent on it.
Just child poverty alone, there's one estimate that it costs in the U.S. around $500 billion each year, in terms of higher healthcare costs, higher crime rates, kids doing less well in schools. And I can't emphasize this enough. We all pay for that, right? Poverty is incredibly expensive for all of us.
However, Bregman says there's another important counterintuitive point. Giving the homeless thousands of dollars ends up saving much of the money we spend now.
It's an investment that pays for itself. So if you get people out of poverty, then you have to spend less on health care, on the police, on all kinds of judicial costs and that kind of stuff. And it turns out that you save money by giving free money. So that's the irony. And homelessness is quite expensive, again, in terms of policing costs and healthcare costs, etc. If you just get people off the streets, that's actually cheaper. You'll turn people into tax-paying citizens who have a job and who can contribute. And in the long run, everyone will be better off. And this is exactly what they found in the Vancouver study.
The argument is, well, it's actually really expensive, right? Isn't it expensive to give every person $7,500? Answer is no. We actually found at the end of 1 year, each cash recipient generated $8,100 savings by virtue of reduced reliance on social services. That's more than the cash transfer itself. And in fact, there's $600 net savings per person per year produced from this cash transfer. So for government policies, for any kind of service providers out there, this is actually a cost-effective approach to reduce homelessness.
The Vancouver experiment is a twist on what's called housing first, a theory that says it makes no sense to require a person to cure their substance abuse or their mental health issues first before they have a place to live. Housing is the linchpin to cure everything else.
Expecting people who are homeless, who are living in shelter, who don't know where they're going to be next week or next month, who don't know where their kids are going to be in school, who don't know where they should get a job because they don't know where they're going to live, to expect people in that crisis situation, in traumatic circumstances, which shelter can be for people, to solve their personal challenges in a steady and creative way is just not reasonable. And the faster we get people into housing, we've discovered from lots of research, the better and the faster they're able to address their problems.
Zhao says the Vancouver experiment is being expanded to other cities in the U.S. Some of the rules may also be different. While the average participant in Vancouver had been homeless 6 months, the new trials may include those who are more chronically homeless. In the meantime, our experts see minds starting to change on who the homeless are and what's behind their distress. Bregman says it has people seriously considering the idea of a basic guaranteed income, which he's long advocated.
If you look at Joe Biden's rescue plan, the American Rescue Plan, there's a basic income for children in there, and it's only going to be for 1 year, but it's still, I think, a revolutionary step, very different from the trajectory that the U.S. has been on for such a long time. I think it will do a huge amount of good. The estimate right now is that it will halt child poverty. The evidence actually tells us that we can trust the poor to make their own decisions, and that the thing they really lack is the money, is the means to make those decisions. And we'll all be better off if we eradicate poverty.
You can find out more about the Vancouver experiment and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. I'm Reed Pence. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
It's not just being sick, it's the stress that comes with the prices of these drugs that makes you feel worse.
The desperation of not being able to afford the drugs that keep you alive.
Then brain aneurysm through the eyes of a survivor.
First of all, I called my mom to say goodbye because it was that bad that I thought, I'm going to die. This is the worst thing ever. And she said, go to the hospital. And I thought, that's a $50 copay. I'm not going to the hospital.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.